Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. There's still some folks joining us, but in a respect for everyone's time on here, we're going to go ahead and get started. So it's my honor to introduce our speaker today, Lisa Wintraub Schifferl. I think I got that close, is a senior policy analyst in the CFPB's Office for Older Americans. She leads the Managing Someone Else's Money Financial Caregiving Program, as well as the Money Smart for Older Adults program. She also supports the office's work to combat elder financial exploitation through network collaboration and age-friendly banking. Ms. Schifferl's career in consumer protection spans more than 20 years. Before coming to the CFPB, she worked for 12 years at the Federal Trade Commission, where she trained consumers, business, and advocates on scams, identity theft, and cybersecurity. She also served as the FTC's identity theft coordinator and litigated fraud and data security cases. Ms. Schifferl spent 8 years at the Maryland Legal Aid Bureau as a staff attorney and supervising attorney. She represented low-income clients in consumer, bankruptcy, housing, public benefits, and employment cases. She received her BA summa cum laude from Yale College and her JD from the University of Virginia School of Law. We're so excited to have you here with us today, and I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to talk to us about Money Smart for older adults. And I think I have to, there you go. Did I get you unmuted?
No. Yes, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Schifferly, and thanks for that nice introduction. As you heard, I'm a senior policy analyst in the CFPB's Office for Older Americans, and I just want to start by thanking Ask for inviting me here today to offer this Train the Trainer webinar. We actually did a listening session with service coordinators about a year ago, and one of the big issues we heard from you all that you wanted to hear more about is fraud and scams and how to help the residents you serve there. So as a former legal services attorney, I want to thank you all for everything you do as service coordinators, because I know it's really important to the people in the housing communities that you serve. So today what I'm going to do is train you on how to use the Money Smart for Older Adults curriculum to teach older adults about how to guard against identity theft, scams, and other forms of financial exploitation. Next slide, please. So first, let me tell you a little bit about Money Smart for Older Adults. It's a curriculum that was jointly developed by the FDIC and the CFPB. If you're not familiar with us, the CFPB is a federal agency, and we work to make sure that banks and lenders treat everyone fairly. The FDIC, you're probably familiar with, is the ones who insure our bank accounts and make sure that we don't have another Great Depression like in the 1930s. So the FDIC and the CFPB have worked together to create Money Smart for Older Adults, which is designed to help raise awareness about how to prevent elder financial exploitation. It also has some financial planning tools as well. So in today's presentation, we have a few objectives on the next slide, please. And we're hoping to help you increase your knowledge about elder financial exploitation, talk a little bit about how to use Money Smart for older adults, and then I'll give a demo about how you would do a presentation on one of the modules. These Money Smart curriculum is broken down by different scams, so you can pick the scams that you want to talk about that are relevant to your curriculum. So you'll get a demo of that, and then I'll talk about related resources, and all the resources I'll talk about today you can get for free, including free shipping at consumerfinance.gov/order, consumerfinance.gov/order. And if you want to get right to the Money Smart materials, it's consumerfinance.gov/moneysmart. So let's set the stage by talking about elder financial exploitation more broadly. Next slide, please. Studies show that the financial exploitation is actually the most common form of elder abuse. So beating out physical and psychological abuse, which is surprising to a lot of people. Estimates of annual losses to older adults have ranged from 2.9 billion to 36.5 billion per year. So it's a lot of money, and you can see the estimates vary widely, but it is a huge problem no matter which estimate you look at. Now, as you'll hear, Money Smart for Older Adults is a train the trainer resource. So the idea is you can take this and then go give presentations in your community. And when you give those presentations, usually those presentations start with a discussion of what is elder financial exploitation. So I'm going to start with that today as well. So on the next slide, you'll see this question: what is elder financial exploitation? If we were in a live audience, we could ask people to offer answers to this question. You're welcome to put in the chat how you would define elder financial exploitation, what you think of when you hear EFE. But generally, for our purposes, what we define elder financial exploitation as is the illegal or improper use of an older person's funds, property, or assets, and that results in depriving the older person of access to or use of their resources, belongings, or assets. So on the next slide, you'll see some examples of financial exploitation. These are ones that can affect anyone, regardless of age, but Money Smart for Older Adults focuses on the scams that are most prevalent with older adults. You may have heard about the grandparent scam. This is where somebody calls and pretends to be the grandchild and says, "Grandma, I'm in trouble. I'm stuck overseas. I just got in a car accident. I need you to wire money. Don't tell mom and dad." Or it might be, "Grandpa, I'm in jail in another country. I need money for bail. Please wire money. Don't tell mom and dad." And really, those are scammers impersonating the grandkids. And with AI and voice cloning, it can be even easier to do that now. So we're very concerned about these scams, and always warn older adults in terms of those scams to check it out and to actually call mom or dad or text the grandkid to see if they really are where the person calling says they are before sending any money. Another big one is romance scams. I know this is one of the most common ones we heard about in the listening sessions with service coordinators, and it's one of the highest dollar losses for older adults. This is when somebody usually meets you online. It can happen in person, but online is where we hear about a lot of the big dollar losses. And these are often organized crime rings who send out the same fake photo to hundreds, if not thousands of people across not just the country, but across the world. And they'll usually say that they're in the military or in an overseas oil rig, so they can't get to you. They'll build up a relationship, sometimes even sending flowers or pizza or things like that. And then they'll start asking for money, sometimes smaller amounts, building up to larger amounts. And it can be tens of thousands of dollars that people wire to somebody who they have not yet met in person. And these, I know from hearing from service coordinators before, they can be really hard to convince somebody that they are a scam because they are convinced they're in love with this person and the person's in love with them. But really, our resources and Money Smart for Older Adults may hopefully help you to convince them. If you have copies of our resource guide, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, then you can give that to people and say, look, this is something that happens to people. Take this home, look at it, think about it, and then maybe they'll come to the realization. There's also tax and debt collection scams, IRS imposters who say that you're behind on your taxes when you're not, and then ask for them to wire your money, and a whole host of telemarketing and phone-related scams. On the next slide, you'll see a few more examples. We talked about telephone scams. They can also be computer and internet scams. Identity theft is a big issue across the age spectrum, where somebody takes your personal information. They may get it from a data breach. They may get it from a break into a car or a home. They may get it from, shoulder surfing as you're typing in your PIN at an ATM. They can get your information a whole variety of different ways and then misuse it for their own benefit. There's also lottery and sweepstakes scams. This is where they send an older adult or anyone something saying you've won a lottery, but all you have to do to claim it is pay these fees and duties and taxes. And so the person pays the fees and duties and taxes, but never gets their so-called prize. So that's how that scam works. And Money Smart goes through the red flags for each of these scams, as well as how to prevent them. But first, let's talk a little bit about who could be an abuser when it comes to elder financial exploitation. Here you'll see that abusers can include people who you know, people who the older adult knows. It can be family members and caregivers. You may see this when they come in and talk about maybe an adult child is exploiting them. Maybe somebody in their home took their personal information who was supposed to be a caregiver. It can be friends, neighbors, or acquaintances, even people in their faith community who they may trust. It can be somebody who's supposed to be acting as their agent under power of attorney who's misusing that role. And on the next slide, you'll see that it can also be strangers. Most people realize this as abuse. Sometimes they don't really realize the friend or neighbor as an abuser, but these include all the scams we talked about, as well as like home repair contractors who may come knocking on people's doors saying they need to fix things in the apartment, or for renters, it can be a utility related scam. There's Medicare scams where they say that they'll give you a back brace or knee brace and it's covered by Medicare, and really they're just stealing your Medicare number. There's a whole host of types of scams, and it's just important for people to recognize, and this is part of the training curriculum you'd give if you were giving a presentation, that the abuser can be both people they know and people they don't know. So on the next slide, you'll see who is at risk. Another thing we like to emphasize in these presentations is that anyone can be the victim of financial exploitation. It can happen regardless of age. It can happen across all social, educational, economic boundaries, race, gender. Anyone can be the victim of financial exploitation. So, and people really should not feel ashamed or embarrassed by it, because it does happen to all sorts of people and can happen to anyone. So now let's talk about Money Smart for older adults. First, I'm going to share a little bit about what it is and how you can use it, and then I'll give a demo of a module. So on the next slide, you'll see some of the objectives. These are some of the things that the Money Smart curriculum tries to teach older adults to do. It's both recognizing scams, guarding against identity theft, and then there's also planning for disasters or loss of ability to manage your finances, and financial caregiving. So on the next slide, you'll see this Money Smart curriculum is an award-winning curriculum. The American Society on Aging gave it an award for excellence in training and education. The components of Money Smart for older adults, you'll see on the next slide. There's an instructor guide. So it is fully scripted so that you can teach the module right away. It has a PowerPoint that you can use that's fully scripted with the instructor guide, so that you can go tomorrow, once you have it, you could give this presentation. Excuse me, I have to sneeze. There's also a resource guide, which you can order and pass out to people in the audience. So this shows you the instructor guide. You can go ahead to the next slide. And there's a COVID supplement and updated materials. So I'll show you each of these in a little more detail. The instructor guide is here. You can see how this is actually the Spanish version, because we have all of these materials in English and in Spanish, including the instructor guide. Because at first we were told, oh, the instructors don't need it in Spanish, because most of the instructors who give presentations in Spanish are bilingual. But we found that many instructors did want it in Spanish too, so they'd have all the words, even if they are bilingual, they have it in Spanish. So we have everything that's in English, we have in Spanish. So you see here has a PowerPoint slide, and then basically what you would say about that slide. It has a presentation planning guide, has activities that we'll talk about, summaries and post-tests that we'll talk about as well. And on the next slide, you'll see information about the resource guide. This is the one that you hand out to people in the audience, and it has information about all those scams that I discussed earlier, as well as a whole lot more. And it has activities to help people learn the materials. It has a glossary of terms, and also has information about financial planning. So these are things that you can hand out in your community or have in your office, regardless of whether you give a presentation. You can order these for free, again, at consumerfinance.gov/order in English and in Spanish, and just have them there for people. or if you do give a presentation, have them there as handouts when you give the Money Smart presentation. On the next slide, you'll see you can also evaluate your training. We have a pre-test and a post-test as part of Money Smart. Sometimes that can be helpful if you have to report back to funders or others about the success of your training. So that's built into the Money Smart curriculum. On the next slide, you'll see you can also evaluate your training through other mechanisms like activity results or your own measures. Next slide, please. And this slide just shows that everything, like I said, is available in both English and in Spanish. The resource guide, the PowerPoints, and the instructor guide, all available in English and in Spanish. On the next slide, you'll see that the features of the Spanish version are identical as the features of the English version. So it's really the same experience in a different language. So now let's turn to how would you use Money Smart for older adults. Now that we've talked about what it is, let's talk about how you can use it. On the next slide, you'll see some examples. I mean, first of all, you can increase your own self-awareness so that when you have people come to you with questions about fraud and scams, you'll be better able to address them. You can order that resource guide and instructor guide and read through it. You can also order some for family and friends and neighbors. You can have them in your office. You can distribute them in your community at libraries or community centers, senior centers, or join a fraud prevention network in your community if you would like to get more involved. In addition, on the next slide, you'll see some other creative ways to engage. Next slide, please. Sometimes you may want to think about ways to give presentations in coordination with theme months like World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, Older Americans Month. So you can give these presentations and you can even go on and become somebody who trains other trainers. So you can give them direct to older adults or become a trainer of other trainers so that you can magnify the effort of Money Smart for older adults. Now let's talk about some of the places you might want to think about doing a Money Smart training. Of course, you all are service coordinators, so the natural place is in the community where you work as a service coordinator in that housing community. You can also think about senior centers, community organizations. You can partner also with, if there's a VITA, volunteer income tax assistance site in your neighborhood or community, that can be a good place that brings together a lot of people that might be interested in hearing this type of presentation. Faith-based organizations and retirement groups are other places to think about giving these presentations. And of course, you all are probably very mindful of these things to consider on the next slide, but when working with older adults in particular, we remind people to think about the audience needs, like make sure there's parking accessible nearby to where the presentation is. Think about the time of day. If you're working with people who don't want to drive at night or don't want to stay up too late, think about the time of day of the presentation. The name of the class is important. You know, we don't want to shame people, especially older adults, about scams and fraud, because then people become scared to report it. So we want to have a name that's empowering, like Money Smart for older adults is designed to try to be empowering rather than like don't get scammed or don't get ripped off or something like that. You know, think of a name of a class as empowering rather than making people feel ashamed or embarrassed that they lost money to a scammer who is a criminal and often part of the sophisticated organized crime ring. So people should not feel ashamed or embarrassed. Again, think about the format of classes. And as you all probably know, if you're able to offer lunch or snacks or anything like that, that always draws people in. Other things to consider are about reaching rural areas, thinking about combining with other programming. Next slide, please. And thinking about media, getting media. And then, of course, measuring success. And we do have those pre and post tests to do that. So now let's look at a snapshot of one of the Money Smart for older adults modules. This is the newest module on romance scams because, like I said, according to the FTC's Consumer Sentinel data, this is one of the highest dollar loss scams for older adults. So now let's pretend you are doing a Money Smart for older adults training. This is what it would look like. You'd ask the audience, what is a romance scam? And usually if you ask that, you're going to get a lot of people who have experienced the scam or know somebody who has. So it's really going to get the conversation started. And then it's good to level set by explaining that, for Money Smart purposes, we're talking about a romance scam as when someone says they love you, but then they start asking for money, usually for an emergency. It's often by gift card, wire transfer, increasingly by cryptocurrency, because those are all ways that it's very hard to get your money back once you've paid them. So the next slide looks at what scammers may do. And this is how all of the scam modules work. Basically, they'll say, what's the scam? What do the scammers do? What are some red flags? And what can you do about it? So what do the romance scammers do? We talked about this a bit before. Usually they're going to say they need money for an emergency. Maybe it's surgery. Maybe it's a medical bill. Maybe they say they're coming to visit, but there are certain unexpected custom fees, or they need money for a flight to come see you. And oftentimes they do build up with smaller amounts and then go to larger amounts. And big red flags are asking for money by gift card, wire transfer, cryptocurrency, because those are ways that people don't get their money back. It's very hard to get reimbursed. On the next slide, you'll see some more traits of these romance scams. People may be contacted through social media, dating apps, websites, text messages, or emails. They'll use fake personas. Sometimes it'll be a completely fake photo of somebody, or sometimes it'll be the real person's photo that's scamming and taking money from people. As I said before, this can be organized crime rings that send up the same photo to lots of different people. They also often get information from social media or from talking to the person about similarities. So there was a Senate Committee on Aging testimony of an older woman who said that she was on Facebook and someone pretended to, somebody asked to be her friend and then said that he liked dogs and liked gardening like her, picked up on her similar interests in order to try to develop the relationship, and then started to ask for money for small amounts. It was actually a very sophisticated crime this time, where he had fake children too who started asking for small monies and gift cards, and then eventually he asked for a large sum of money to visit. And unfortunately, at that point, this person said she'd already spent tens of thousands of dollars. Basically, the life insurance from her late husband's will was all spent, and so she no longer had money to pay for basic necessities and air conditioning. And she said that it was not only learning about the scam, but also giving up on the life she thought she was going to have. So you can see how these really pull on people's heartstrings. Okay, sorry about that. We've been having trouble with our Zoom connection, which is why I asked asked to advance the slides in case this happened. So I'm grateful that you did, and sorry for that disruption. Hopefully it won't happen again. But if it does, I'll be back quickly. So in-person romance scams also happen. They can happen with somebody in a church or temple or social group, especially after a spouse passes away. That can be a time that people take advantage of others. So what are the warning signs of romance scams? On the next slide, you'll see that some of the warning signs may be somebody who is overly complimentary, wants to keep things secret is a big red flag. shows interest in your finances. The big thing is asking for money when you haven't even met them. And it sounds very basic, but lots of people send money to people they have not met yet in these romance scams. So that is a big thing to tell people if you have someone coming to you, to try to advise them to please don't send money to someone they have not met in person ever in their lives. On the next slide, you'll see information about getting help if somebody has lost money to a romance scam. The big things we tell them is to cut off communication with the scammer, telling the financial institution if they sent money through the financial institution, or if it's a gift card or wire transfer, contact that payment processor right away. The person can also report the scammer to local law enforcement, to Adult Protective Services, and to the Federal Trade Commission at reportfraud.ftc.gov. It is very hard to get your money back, but the sooner that people report it, the more likely they are to have any chance of getting their money back. On the next slide, I want to talk about a few other types of scams. There are other types of telephone and internet scams, and older adults are increasingly the targets of scam artists, both on the telephone as well as online, since we've all been doing more online during the pandemic. The next slide talks about the grandparent scam, which I talked about at the beginning. Okay. I'm just going to turn my video off in the hope that it'll make it less likely to cut out. Apologies again. So the grandparent scam we talked about before, that this is where somebody says, they may even know your grandchild's name and say, "Hi, Grandma, it's Lisa. I'm in trouble. Don't tell Mom and Dad. Please wire me money." So that's the way that scam happens. And on the next slide, you'll see the way the IRS telephone scam happens, where they say that you owe money for taxes. And I know I got this call multiple times, both through robocall and live people saying it's the IRS. They tell you that there's going to be a lawsuit against you. Sometimes they give you fake IRS badge numbers. They may even know the last 4 digits of your social security number. But usually it's just an automated phone call, and they're trying to get you to give personal information so that they can use it for identity theft. So it's just really good to be aware of these scams so that you can recognize them when someone tells you about it. Also, these scammers are very easily able to spoof the IRS's phone number or Medicare's phone number. So it may look very believable, like the phone call is coming, in fact, from IRS or Medicare. But the thing that people need to know is they can't trust caller ID, because you don't really know who's calling you unless you hang up and call back at a number you know to be correct. The last scam I want to talk about are these lottery and sweepstakes scams, where they say that you have to pay money in order to claim a prize. Sometimes they'll then do a sweepstake recovery scam. Once it's apparent that you're not going to get any winnings, then you might get another call from someone saying they're an attorney representing sweepstakes winners, and they'll help you get your money from your winnings. But then, of course, they just take an upfront fee and you never get the money. So people can be double victimized in these lottery and sweepstakes scams. On the next slide, you'll see that the Money Smart for Older Adults curriculum, in addition to describing the scams and how to recognize them, has activities that can help people learn more about the scam. So there's a telephone scam activity where it basically gives an example scenario, and it helps participants to identify red flags of the scam. So I'll just read for you an example of the scenario that the Money Smart activity has. So it says, Jane is home watching TV when the telephone rings. She answers the call, and the man on the line says, "Congratulations, you've won $2.7 million in the lottery." Jane's surprised. Although she buys lottery tickets, she hasn't given her name to anyone. The caller tells her that there are a couple things she needs to do before she can receive her check. He directs Jane to go to her bank and withdraw $2,700 to cover processing fees. He tells her to forward the funds through a local wire service or to buy and send a special prepaid card that will expedite the process. Jane heads to her bank to withdraw the money. The next day, the person calls to say they received the funds and an additional $5,000 is needed to pay the taxes. So that's a scenario you can read out and then ask people to identify the red flags. Of course, that's chock full of red flags. If you want to mention some of them in the chat that you identified, please feel free to do so. But that's just an example of one activity that you can use to make your presentation more interactive. And it does, work a lot better in person than in virtual context, but you can do it both ways using the chat if you're doing a virtual presentation. On the next slide, I want to talk about identity theft because in addition to scams, the Money Smart curriculum covers identity theft. And I'm sure you all know what identity theft is: when somebody takes your personal information and misuses it in order to get goods or services for themselves. They may take your social security number, birth date, name, credit card number, PINs, passwords. So Money Smart goes through some safeguards that people can take to try to prevent against identity theft. The next slide has those safeguards. And some of those are to protect incoming and outgoing mail, especially around tax time, not to put your taxes just in the outgoing mail, especially if you're in a rural area where you put the little red flag up showing people that there's mail there to be picked up. To take it directly to the post office or at least to a locked mailbox, because people at tax time especially go around trying to grab those, and that has your taxes have pretty much all your personal information. So those are a bad thing to have stolen. Signing up for direct deposit is a good identity theft prevention tool too. Social Security has switched to all direct deposit, but if you have other money coming in, direct deposit can be safer than having checks floating through the mail. Using a shredder, most people know about now. And it's also really important to monitor bank accounts and credit card bills and check your credit report at annualcreditreport.com for any suspicious activity. You can check it for free more than annually now. Now they've made it so you can check it, I believe, weekly for free. But annualcreditreport.com, you can get a free credit report. You don't need to check it that often, but I would recommend checking it at least annually. So what do you do if you're a victim of identity theft? On the next slide, you'll see that the most important thing to do is to report identity theft. You can do that at identitytheft.gov. It's a relatively new federal government website. It's a one-stop shop that allows people to report identity theft. And then they get a personalized recovery plan that walks them through all the steps they need to take for that particular type of identity theft. It also gives them an identity theft report, which is something that they need to exercise their rights under a law called the Fair Credit Reporting Act. So basically, as an identity theft victim, you can block certain information from your credit report if you have this identity theft report. So identitytheft.gov makes it easy. It's free. It's available in English and in Spanish, again, for people to file a report, get an identity theft report, and get a personalized plan about the steps to take for identity theft. On the next slide, you'll see there's also an activity about identity theft in the Money Smart resource guide. This activity basically gives people a list of identity theft protection measures and asks them to what extent they're implementing them in their own lives, like having strong passwords or shredding things. And then they can tally up their scores and see where to improve. So that can be a good interactive tool if you're giving one of these presentations. It's activity 3 in the resource guide to look out for. So that concludes the substantive part of the Money Smart for Older Adults training. And basically, Money Smart covers a whole bunch of different scams, and you can pull out the scams that you're seeing in your community and do the modules on those scams for your presentation. The whole entire Money Smart for Older Adults is over 2 hours of content, so you probably are not going to do that, but you can pull out the points that are most relevant to your audience. I also want to talk about a few other free resources that you may want to share with audiences in your trainings or just, with people in your community, and have copies on hand in your office. So on the next slide, you'll see our managing someone else's money guides. These are now actually part of the Money Smart curriculum too. We've co-branded them with Money Smart and the FDIC. And these are guides for people who are serving as financial caregivers. Maybe they're acting as the agent under power of attorney for somebody, or they're acting as a guardian or trustee, or Social Security representative, payee, or VA representative. So there are separate guides for different types of financial caregivers that walk people through what they need to do in that role. We also have another new piece on the next slide called Considering a Financial Caregiver, Know Your Options. And this is for people early in the caregiving process. So maybe you have someone who comes to you and you can see, or maybe they even say to you that they feel like they are starting to need help with managing their finances. This walks through some informal options like a conversation partner, a trusted contact, a convenience account. Trusted contact is basically where you just name somebody who will get alerts if they see elder financial exploitation on your account. That person will not have access to the money in the account, but they'll just get notified when there is exploitation. A convenience account will allow that caregiver to actually pay bills on that account. And then it also goes over formal caregivers like the ones we discussed on the previous slide: power of attorney, guardianship, conservatorship, etc. And finally, it has a list of questions for choosing a caregiver, because this is really important, because often exploitation happens, as we said at the beginning, if there's a caregiver who is not acting in the person's best interest. So it goes over a list of questions for people to consider when they're choosing a caregiver so they can try to choose the best and most appropriate one. On the next slide, you'll see our fraud prevention placemats and handouts. These are also part of Money Smart now, so you can find them in addition to the URLs on this slide. You can find them at consumerfinance.gov/moneysmart. These are like brightly colored, nice handouts. You can use them as posters. You can use them as placemats under meals. They were originally designed with meal delivery programs, so that people would get a brightly colored message about fraud prevention while they got their meal delivered to them. So if you work with any meal delivery programs, you could order them and hand them out to residents with meals, or you can just have them to distribute. Some of them also have word games and crossword puzzles and other interactive ways to learn about fraud, so they can be good ones to have on hand if you do give a presentation, or if you just want to have resources in your office for people. And then on the next slide, I do want to mention about submitting a complaint to the CFPB, because a lot of people don't realize about that aspect of our agency. And people can submit a complaint in consumerfinance.gov/complaint if they have a product with a financial product or service. So that would be like a credit card, a checking account, student loan, payday loan, mortgages, all the things listed on this slide. If somebody is dealing with a scam, like a lot of the scams that we talked about today, they should go to reportfraud.ftc.gov. But if they're dealing with a financial product or service, and if that person or entity has not helped them, we do encourage people first to follow up with the entity directly. But if they have not gotten a good reaction from the company, then once we get the complaint, we will reach out to the company. And we usually get a response within 15 days from the company. And sometimes, once people get the complaint coming from the CFPB rather than an individual, might get a little more attention. On the last slide, I just want to mention our contact information where you're free to contact us. Excuse me. And with that, I will be happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Lisa. As you guys are formulating any questions you might have, feel free to chat them. Or if you would like to raise your hand, I can unmute you. But I really appreciate all the information that Lisa just shared. I know one of the questions that I had gotten in the chat was about the resources and being sent out. Lisa's going to, as I understand, Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, going to send us the resources and the links that she spoke about, and then we will send those out to the attendees tomorrow. Okay, it looks like everybody's thanking us for their time. There's a question coming in right now, Lisa. I don't know if you can see the chat, right? There, Lisa, I think I unmuted you.
Yes. Is
Sorry.
there all right, that's okay. I'm still coughing anyhow. Is there direct express going on right now? I can't comment on any scams that we know about like that, but you can look and Google Direct Express and scam and see what you see about that, because there have been issues with Direct Express in the past.
Somebody says they have a new scam in their building. A resident got a call on a PayPal account she didn't have. Also, another resident on an Amazon account that she didn't have that either, but almost fell for it.
Yes, we are seeing PayPal related scam and Amazon related scams, and the FTC has some good blogs about both of this.
You okay over there?
Yeah, I just have a cold, so sorry about that.
Oh no, you spoke for 45 minutes
Made it
straight,
through the
so
whole presentation, but
you made it. That was pretty impressive.
yeah. Sorry about that, but
You're
thank you
fine.
all.
Yeah, I
And
think
I will send the resources so that
yeah,
everyone can have all the resources.
perfect. Perfect. All right. Well, that concludes our time today. Thank you again, Lisa, and thank you everyone who attended. And we will be in touch soon. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.